Hey there. In this video, I'd like to show you how to create a MongoDB admin panel in just 5 minutes. If you've previously created an admin panel on top of MongoDB, you quickly realize that this is really difficult to do because you need to create a server that would connect to the database, and this involves creating routes, resolvers, and schemas that will actually talk to the database and perform updates. And that's just one side of the story because you also need to create a front-end UI for it that will consume the data from your API. And this operation can run for weeks or even months, depending on how complex what you're building is. But there's a much easier way to do that, and that is using Appsmith. In fact, you can build a MongoDB admin panel in just 5 minutes using Appsmith, and that is what I'd like to show you in this video. In this video, we are going to be building a MongoDB admin panel similar to what you see on the screen. And what you have right here on the screen is the admin panel for an online store's inventory. We have products from that inventory, and we can see the list of products on the table we have over here. And we also have a form by the left-hand side that can be used to update the product selected from the table. So clicking on a new item on the table updates the form with the information about that item, and then users can go in to actually do the updates by clicking on the update button. And over here at the bottom, we have a chart that shows the sales information about that product selected on the table. So I'm just going to select a new product on the table so that you see that the chart actually gets updated whenever a new item is selected on the table. So this is the admin panel that we'll be building to manage the data for an online store's inventory. And speaking about data, we have our data in MongoDB Atlas. We can see that over here we have two collections. We have the product collection, which has a list of products. And we can see each product has an image, has a price, has a quantity, has an expiring date, a name, and also a description. And the sales collection holds information about the sales for each product. So for each sales item, we have the product that it is linked to. We also have the date of the sales and the quantity of that product that was sold on that particular day. So this is an overview of what we'll be building and the data source that we'll be making use of. So for us to get started, let us head over to Appsmith, and I am going to log in. You can go ahead to sign up if you do not already have an account. I'm going to click on the Create New App, and the first thing I'd like to do will be to name this application. So let's call this Mongo Dashboard. And here we have a blank application presented to us. So the first thing I would like to do, that is after naming my app, would be to connect to the database. And to do this, I am going to head over to the DBQuery section. I'm going to click on New Data Source, and I'll be selecting MongoDB because that is what we'll be showing in this video. I would like to name my data source Mongo. And for the connection mode, since we are building an admin panel, we would set the connection mode to read-write because we want to be able to read data and as well update data. For the connection type, we will be setting replica set because that is the standard connection type given to us by default on MongoDB Atlas. Then for the host IP address, I am going to be getting that from my MongoDB Atlas. I would click on connect to Mongo Shell, and I am going to copy this over. For the port, I'm going to leave it as default. Then authentication, we would need to select a database name we are connecting to. For that, I'm just going to copy the database name I have, and I'll paste that here. I'm going to set my username, which is Appsmith, and I'm going to set my password right here, which is Appsmith. And after inputting my username and password for that database, I'd like to click the test button to see if all the information I supplied to this form is correct. So let us click the test button, and we can see that the connection is actually valid. So I'm going to go ahead to save this. And the next thing I'd like to do would be to create a query that actually fetches products from my product collection. Don't forget that we have two collections over here in MongoDB. We have the product collection and the sales collection. So the first thing I'd like to do would be to read data from my product collection. And to do that, I am going to click on the new query button. Let us call this query get products because it actually fetches products. And this is going to be a read query, so I can just select the read template. And I am going to be accessing my products collection. If you would need to be doing filtering while reading data, you can go ahead to configure the filter, sort, and limit field, but I wouldn't need any of that, so I'm just going to delete them. I'm going to click on the run button to see if what I have works, and we can see that we have data returned, so that means my query is successful. I'm going to click on the add widget button to create a new widget using this query. So over here I'm presented with a table widget, and we can see that for the table data property, my data coming from the get products query is automatically linked to it. What I'm just going to do is I'm going to configure this table in such a way that we do not have irrelevant information showing up. So I'm going to disable the image column. I'm also going to disable the expires at column. I'm going to disable the description column and the underscore ID. Then I would move the name column above, and here we can see we have a nice looking table showing up with the names of the items, the quantity, and the price. One thing I would like to do would be to edit the price column so that it shows the dollar sign. This will easily indicate to users that the price is money. So I'm going to head over to the price column, and I am going to edit it. For the computed value, I'm just going to throw in a dollar sign, and we can see that the information is updated correspondingly on the table widget. Now we have the ability to read data from the database. The next thing I would like to do would be to actually update items from the database. And to make that work, I would need a form widget. I'm just going to edit this by dragging it a little bit so that I'll create more room for the form widget. I'm going to head over to the widget section, and I'll grab in a form widget to view. So over here I have a form widget. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so that we can fit everything in the screen. I'm going to move this and move this over here. And we have everything nicely fitting on the screen. So the form widget has a reset button and a submit button by default, but we would need to supply other widgets that would need to perform our updates. So the first widget I would need would be an input widget to update the quantity of the product. The other widget I would need will also be a date picker widget to update the expiry date of each product. So I'm just going to resize this so that everything is staying nicely on the form. I also need to bring in a few text widgets to serve as labels for my inputs. So I'm just going to drag this in. And lastly, I would need to bring in a text widget that would serve as the name of the product we are talking about. To easily link data coming from the table to the form, Appsmith gives us an easy way to do this. I'm going to demonstrate that by linking this text widget to reflect the name of the item selected on the table widget, such that when a new item is selected on this table widget, the text widget is updated accordingly to reflect the name of the item selected on the table. So for that, I'm going to set the text property to be coming from the table. And that will be table one.selected row dot name, and we can see that is updated over here. So I'm just going to make this big so that you can see it. And we can see the name of the item selected on the table is updated. So changing that item, we can see it is also updated over here. I'm going to do the same for the input and the date picker widget, but before I do that, I'm just going to update the labels to properly reflect the item that they refer to. So this is going to be referring to the quantity, and this is also going to be referring to the expiry. All right, so we have the widgets properly labeled. And now I would like it such that the default text of this widget would be the quantity of the item selected on the table. I'm going to set the data type of this widget to number because quantities are in numbers, in case you didn't know. So I am going to update the default text to be coming from the selected item on the table. So selected row dot quantity. And I'm going to do the same for the date picker widget. We have the default date. I am going to enable JavaScript so that I can grab the item selected from the table. So it will be table1 dot selected row. Oh, sorry about that. Dot expires at. And we can see that the quantity and the date picker widget is automatically linked to the item selected on the table. So selecting a new item, say the second item on the table, we can see that everything is updated accordingly. And one nice feature I'd like to add will be the ability to display the image of the item selected on the table. Because on the finished product, we have the image of the item showing up on the form. So let's just quickly configure that. I would need an image widget to have that happen. So I'm going to drag in an image widget. So we have an image widget over here. I am going to resize this and I will set the image URL to be coming from the table. So this will be table.selected row.image. And just as a side note, you can easily rename any widget by clicking on the widget name, but I'm just going to leave everything as we have them default. The next thing I'd like to do would be to configure the submit button such that when it is clicked, a new query is run to update the item selected on the table using the information provided on this form. So to have that happen, I am going to configure the submit button. For the onClick action, I am going to execute a DB query, and this is going to be a new query that actually does the update. So I'm going to name this query update product, and I am going to set my MongoDB data source. This is going to be an update query, and we are presented with a template for updates. We are going to be referencing our product query because we actually want to update the product. And for the query itself, we want to select the underscore ID and want the ID of the item updated to be the object ID of the item selected on the table. So for that, I'm going to write object ID. And for its value, I am going to be grabbing that from the table. So table1 dot selected row dot underscore ID. And we can see on the pop-up pane we have over here, we can see the evaluated value of whatever we are writing here. So in this case, we have an item selected on the table, and we can see the ID of the item selected on the table evaluated over here. For the updates, I would like to update the quantity. I'm just going to indent this a little bit, so that you can see what I am writing. All right, so we're going to be updating the quantity, and the value would be gotten from the form we have. So it's going to be form.data.inputs. And we can see that evaluated over here. The other thing we would like to update will be the expires at. And for its value, we would be also grabbing that from the form. So it is going to be the form.data.datePicker. And we can see the evaluated value showing up here. So I'm just going to click on the run button to test if this query actually works. And we can see that the action ran successfully. We have a success message. All right, so we have our submit button configured. The last thing we'd like to do on the submit button is we want to configure it in such a way that whenever the query is successfully run, we want to update the table shown here. So for the on-success, after this query runs successfully, I would like to execute a DB query, and I would like to call the get product query again so that we have our table refreshed with the most updated information. Alright, so we have that configured. I am going to select the third item on the table. Now I want to do a test run to see if everything works together. I'm going to select the third item on the table, and for the quantity, I'm going to update this to 50, and I'm going to set the date to a new date. So let's submit this. And we can see that everything works successfully because the item is updated to 50, and selecting it, we can see that the date is set to the 14th, which is what we picked just now. One cool thing we can do on the table widget is that we can specify a default selected index, such that when the table is re-rendered, the index we supplied will be selected by default. So to have that enabled, we should go back to the table widget, and we have a default selected row. So I'm just going to supply index 0. This means that whenever this table is rendered, the first item would be selected. So selecting the 5th item we have, for example, and trying to update the table. After the update is successful, we have the first item selected by default, and we have that configured. The last thing we'll need to do, going back to our reference app, would be to show the sales data for each item selected on the table. So we want it such that when a new item is selected on the table, the sales information for that particular item is shown on the chart data. And to configure that, let's head back to our dashboard. We would want to bring in a chart data on the canvas. So go back to the widget section. I'm going to drag in a charts widget, and I'm going to resize this to fit our view. We want it such that when an item is selected on the table, the sales collection is queried, and information about that item selected on the table is brought down and shown on the chart widget. So head over to the table widget, and we want to configure an action on row selected. We want to execute a DB query, and this is going to be a new query, so I'm going to click on the create query. This would be a get query. I'm going to call this get product sales. And since this is going to be a read query, I would need to select Mongo and select the read query because this is going to be a read query. We will be reading from the sales collection because now we actually want to query sales information. So this will be the sales collection. And for its filter, this will be the products, because going back to our database we have on Atlas, every sales item has a related product. So I would need to reference that as the filter. So this will be product, and this will be the object ID of the product selected on the table. So I would need to access the ID of the product selected on the table. So it will be table1 dot selected row dot underscore ID. And I wouldn't be needing any other thing in my query, so I'm just going to take that out. And over here on the evaluated pane, we can see everything that has been evaluated in this query. So I'm just going to click on the run button to see if this works, and we can see that we have a list of sales for that particular product selected on the table. So let us head back to our chart widget and let us tie in that data. So I'm going to head back to the configuration of the chart widget. And for the chart widget, we can select a chart type. I'm just going to leave this as the line chart. And we have a sales data. You can see that the sales data expects information in this format, which is an array of objects. And each object has two coordinates, the X coordinate, which serves as the label, and the Y coordinate, which serves as the value. So I will need to keep this in mind when linking data from my sales query. So I'm just going to select all of this and take it out. I'll be reading data from my sales query, so which is the get product sales dot data. But because this widget expects data in a particular format, I'll need to do some data transformation to make sure that I'm returning an array of items that have both X and Y coordinates. So for my data, I'm going to map through it, and I am going to be returning an object of x coordinates, which would serve as the label. So I'm going to set this to s.date, and a y coordinate that would actually be the value. So I'm going to set this to sales.quantity. And we can see that the chart widget is automatically re-rendered to reflect the information we have over here. But you can quickly notice that the information shown on the x coordinates, which is the date of the sales, does not really look nice. So one thing we can easily do is we can use Moment, which is a JavaScript date formatting library, to quickly format the dates we have over here to make it more presentable. So to configure that, I am just going to wrap this in Moment. I'm going to wrap the date in Moment, and I'm going to be accessing the dot format. And for the format, this will be month, day. So we can see that we have a clean date string up here. I'm just going to set the chart type to area chart so that we have something that looks really cool. All right, so we have a really nice table showing over here. So we have a really nice dashboard showing up right here, where we can see information of all the products we have on our dashboard. We can quickly scroll to a new page if we want to do that. We can also have a form showing up right here that shows the image of the item selected on the table. We also have the name of the item. We have the quantity of the item automatically prefilled, and we also have the date of the item prefilled. And clicking on the submit button would actually perform an update based on the item we have selected on the table. And lastly, we have a chart widget which shows the sales information of the particular product we have selected on the table. So clicking on a new item on the table would actually update the chart we have over here. So we pretty much have everything we can see or we have here on the sample app. We have the table configured, we have the form configured, and we have a chart configured. The last thing we may need to do would just be to add some cleanup. And at this point, I would like to use some video magic. So 1, 2, ready, go. All right, and we can see that we have magically restructured everything we have on our dashboard. Now we have a splash image using an image widget. We have a header using the text widget inside of a container. And now we have our form, the table, the form, and the chart widget sitting inside a new container widget, which is this container widget. And now we have some text widget serving as the label. So we are pretty much done. And to deploy this, you just have to hit the deploy button we have over here. Hitting deploy will deploy the application, and you can go ahead to make use of the application as you normally would. All right, so this is how you can easily build a MongoDB admin panel using Appsmith in just 5 minutes. I encourage you to go ahead and give it a try.